I practically raised my little brothers. Our parents worked minimum wage jobs in the city, an hour's drive away that had them leaving in the morning when it was still dark, and the sea was calm beneath a gray dawn. We were left behind in the small coastal town where we were born in, where there weren't enough jobs to go around. My earliest memory is my dad teaching me to swim in the ocean, surrounded by all that blue, salt on my tongue, a taste that you never quite shake growing up in a place like this. I think the only thing that saved my parents' marriage was the fact that they hardly saw each other. Sleeping back to back in the same bed was the closest that they ever got. They were married right out of high school, 19 and too young to see the future of lifelong bills and debts that they couldn't pay that waited for them. I'd see their wedding photo, my dad in the rented suit that fit him wrong, looking at my mom like she was the answer. My mom was the quiet type, and every year she seemed to get more distant, spending more and more of her time staring at the waves. My brothers were twins, born within less than a minute of each other. Milo came into this world first, alone, and Danny followed, just like he always did. From the moment that he was born, Danny had never been without Milo. I was 5 years older than them, but I didn't mind the months that stretched between us. I knew they both loved me, just couldn't love me the same way that they loved each other. Milo was the dark to Danny's light. Milo loved to run, chasing rabbits down all the dunes, racing goalies along the boardwalk. And Danny liked to be still, watching the sky change color, daydreaming stretched out on the sand. Danny covered his face in his hands at the violent parts of the movies, and Milo's eyes would never leave the screen. But eventually he'd sigh and fast forward past. Every time. Anything for Danny. But Danny would follow Milo anywhere. When they were 13, Milo came home with a buzz cut. Mom cried because his baby blonde hair, soft like sunlight, was gone. And Milo looked like a stranger sitting up on the kitchen counter. Dad had yelled, but as always was too tired to follow through on his threats. You could see the curve on his skull showing behind a stubble of gold, like a cornfield burned down. Danny stared at him, ocean eyes brimming with brine, and for the first time in their lives, not a mirror image. He had taken Milo by the hand, dragging him upstairs. A few minutes later, we heard the hum of Dad's electric razor from the bathroom, and when they reappeared, Danny's hair was gone too, washed down the shower drain like the childhood that they were leaving behind. When the boys were 6 and had started losing their baby teeth, I told them stories about the tooth fairy. Danny had listened anxiously, hanging on every word. Milo had grinned at me from behind his back, even at 6, not believing a word, but not ruining the magic for Danny either. Danny had lost a tooth first, spat delicately into the bathroom sink, blood splattering the porcelain like a constellation in red. He had carefully placed it under his pillow, going to bed early that night so that way the tooth fairy would come sooner. Milo came into my room just before their bedtime. The moon hung outside my open window, stealing the tides from the shore. Milo grinned and pulled the tooth that had been loose all week right out of his mouth, handing it to me triumphantly, blood pooling in his palm. When I was 15, a summer storm knocked the power out, every light in the house blowing at once. Me and Milo had been out on the beach, swimming in the warm rain with our mouths wide open, summer dripping down our throats. We watched from the water as the lights in the house that backed onto the sand suddenly died. Milo ran all the way home, feet bare on the tarmac, bringing the ocean with him on his skin. I followed, but I couldn't keep up. And when Milo ran, it was like trying to chase the tide, always just out of reach. Danny was in his bedroom, terrified of the dark that filled the hallways. Danny cried from upstairs and Milo banged open every drawer in the kitchen, grabbing candles, bringing them to life carefully with a plastic green lighter. I didn't ask him where he had got it from, watching from the doorway as he had placed the candles carefully all over Danny's room, comforting him and saying that the dark was only because of the storm, and he didn't need to be scared when he was with Milo. I knew I had to go to the basement to flip the fuse box back on. And I was terrified of our basement. And once when I was younger, the sea had flooded in, leaving strange tide marks on the walls, a steady drip always echoing from the ceiling. I had bad dreams about the basement, of a voice calling me down into the dark. I stood outside the door, knuckles white on the handle, trying to be brave for Danny. And before I could open it, Milo had slipped his hand into my free one, squeezing tight. And together we walked into the basement, armed with flashlights, and turned the power back on. When I was with Milo, I wasn't scared either. My little brother was far darker than anything waiting for me down those steps. When they were 7, I had found Milo out on the dunes by the cliffs. Danny was reading on the beach on his back. Milo was crouched over, tears dripping into the seagrass and lavender that grew every spring, just out of reach from being drowned. At his feet was a rabbit, velvet soft, its neck broken. I had crouched next to him and he clung to me, sobbing into my shoulder, small and afraid as seagulls wheeled white into the sky.
"I didn't mean to do it, Daisy."
And then quieter.
"I don't want to hurt anyone."
His voice was muffled in my sweatshirt as it soaked up all the salt. I stroked his hair and we buried the rabbit together, driftwood a grave marker. And we never told Danny. When the boys were 11 and I had just got my license, I decided to take them for a drive in my car, third handoff of a neighbor. I had loved that car, rusted and yellowed with a cracked headlight that made it look like it was winking. They raced to sit shotgun and I watched as Milo let Danny win, pretending to trip at the last second. We drove with the windows down, ocean breeze lifting my hair like a veil over my face, road stretching wide with possibilities beneath the wheels. Danny loved to swim, loved floating belly up in the waves watching the clouds. Milo was terrified of the open water once you got past the cliffs, but always swam past them, always pushing, always going too far, despite the fear that had made him shake as he stepped into the tide. And Danny always followed, and sometimes when I watched them swimming from the shore, I couldn't tell who was out in the water. When I was 14, Danny started getting night terrors. Our parents would sleep through them, too deep at the bottom of their dreams from the 60-hour week to wake up. I would get up every time, eyes half shut, but Milo always beat me to it. I'd reach Danny's room and find him already back asleep, Milo curled up on the twin-sized mattress with him like a guard dog, a tangle of limbs. I'd watch them a while to make sure that they were okay, breathing in time like they shared a set of lungs. Growing up, we didn't have a garden because the beach was our backyard. We had a deck, painted white by Dad when they first bought the house, a menagerie of mismatched sun loungers and chairs pulled from skips. When I was 14, I found the bird bones buried underneath. Too many bones to come from any less than 10. Milo cried when I confronted him, and I held him through it.
"I don't want to hurt anyone, Daisy,"
he said, eyes like the ocean. We were both scared by then. When the boys were 13, Danny stopped eating. Our parents were oblivious, even as bags like bruises under his eyes appeared and his wrists became tiny beneath the long sleeves he always wore. They left before breakfast in the morning and got home after I had made dinner, heating up whatever I had made in the microwave. Me and Milo watched him waste away until his ribs were starting to show. Milo stopped swimming so far out, terrified that Danny would drown if he got too tired. I had asked him why, trying to hold back tears after I had made him vanilla birthday cake, even though they wouldn't turn 14 for another 3 months. He'd managed 2 bites. He wouldn't talk to me no matter how hard I tried to reach him. Milo told me it was because Danny was too sad. The world made him too sad. I worked overtime every weekend at the beach restaurant in town, pulling night shifts as often as I could, leaving the fridge stacked with ready meals for the boys. My grades slipped as I slept through most of my classes, but I didn't care. My parents had finally noticed that Danny was sick. They hadn't noticed Milo was too. 6 months of saving and we finally had enough money to send Danny to a therapist. Milo went with him to every single appointment, sitting in the waiting room flipping through the magazines, hand thrumming with nervous energy. I'd give him the old receipts and crumpled calculus notes from the bottom of my bag while he waited, and he turned them into paper birds. He would hand them over to his brother wordlessly on the drive home, and Danny kept them on his windowsills like reminders. Danny started painting as part of his therapy, otherworldly canvases thick with colors. And he would draw for hours, on newspapers and takeaway menus and as well as napkins. Milo kept every single drawing that he gave him, taping them pride of place onto his bedroom wall. And Dad had lost his job, and I had dropped out for my final year of high school to help at home and look after the boys. But they both knew that it was really because of Danny. Still shades too small. Danny cried when I told them, begging me to go back, terrified that he was ruining my life. Milo rolled his eyes and brushed the tears roughly from his face with the backs of his knuckles, saying if I'd wanted to, I would have stayed. I loved them both so much in that moment, wrapping my arms around them and locking us together in a knot of suntan arms and dirty blonde hair. We sat on the deck, Danny drawing and Milo fighting with his homework, a string of fairy lights blowing in the sea breeze. It was only supposed to be until Dad found another job. And when they were 15, I was still living at home, working as a cleaner at the beachfront hotel part-time while I went to night school to get my GED. I'd started seeing Tom. He would surf badly, and he was a bartender at one of the 2 bars in town. He loved me a little more than I had loved him, but it suited us both fine. The first time that he came over, Danny hadn't spoken a word, just staring suspiciously from his seat on the couch, feet curled under him like a cat. Milo had sized him up, getting in his personal space despite being a head shorter. Tom had just laughed at them both, and it was how I'd known that I wanted him to stick around. Their hair had grown back, dirty blonde, but not as soft as when they had been little. They had taken to cliff jumping that summer. Milo would fling himself off without hesitation, screaming with pure visceral joy as he fell through the sky. And Danny would always follow, despite his fear of the rocks below. I couldn't bear to watch them, heart in my mouth every time as my brothers were swallowed by the sea. But every time they surfaced together, laughing and yelling at the waves. When they were 15, Milo started staying out every night until past midnight, climbing in the window that Danny would leave open for him. And I had said nothing, but noticed when missing dog posters started multiplying in the neighborhood. Notches grew on Milo's wrists, precise in scar tissue. Again, I said nothing. Danny started skipping school to go to the beach, would come home smelling like the sea, pockets full of shells and green sea glass. Danny loved sea glass, broken bottles worn down by the waves until they washed up something new. And Milo started fighting at school, would come home with new shades of purple on his knuckles, bruises like the sky after lightning hit the sea-leveling dead fish adrift onto the surface. Once he had come home with a gash above his eyebrow that dripped into his eyes until all he saw was red. The other boy was off school a week, and Milo was suspended for 2. Mom and Dad had grounded him, and I sat him on the side of the tub as I cleaned it as best I could, hands clumsy with worry.
I don't want to hurt them, Daisy,
he told me as I pressed a band-aid gently on the broken skin. And I knew that he meant it. On my 21st birthday, Mom and Dad both called in sick. For the first time that I can remember, we were all in one place, no longer adrift in the world. My parents gave me money, suddenly shy, apologizing it wasn't enough. I knew how many hours had gone into the small envelope in my hands, and I told them so. Danny gave me a painting that he had done of me walking into the ocean. And it was beautiful. Delicate swirls of blues and greens and purples. My hair merging with the waves as it blew into the non-existent breeze. And Milo gave me a necklace, just as beautiful. It was a delicate silver chain with a pendant shaped like a daisy. I wore it every day after that, never taking it off. I smacked a kiss on Milo's forehead and he retched, wiping it off, but I could tell from the grin that filled his face that he was secretly pleased. I remembered when the boys had started high school, driving them on their first day. The football coach had seen Milo running track, and other boys left long behind, because you can't catch the tide. Milo had immediately been put on the team. Milo could run until his legs gave up, until he burned out. Danny had tried out for the team too, but didn't make it. And a week later, Milo had quit. Couldn't see the point if his brother wasn't there with him. And when the twins reached 17, Milo started drinking with his friends, boys with fast cars and low lives. It seemed like there would be something new in his bed every week. Boys and girls always gone by the morning. Danny brought nobody home. but I saw the way that he would blush every time we bought slushies from the 7-Eleven from the pretty girl behind the counter with the crooked front teeth. And one morning I watched the boys racing down the sand, muscles in Milo's back rippling like wings beneath the surface of his skin, slowing himself just enough that Danny could keep up. A group of Milo's friends waded in the surf, shoving each other into the waves, playing chicken balancing on their shoulders, all salty smiles and sunburnt skin. I watched as Milo and one of the boys played at drowning each other. Milo held him under just a little too long, and a little too hard. The boy surfaced, coughing the ocean out of his lungs. The others had laughed it off, but I could tell that it was the uneasy kind, as if realizing for the first time that there was a wild animal living in the skin of their friend. Milo went to parties every Friday. Danny was never invited, but Milo took him along every time, arm around his shoulders like a warning to outsiders, and nobody would ever question Milo. When they were 17, I saw Milo staring at a dead fox in the driveway, hit by a car off the main road. He stared at it, lifeless and beautiful, until Danny saw and started to cry softly, heartbroken. Milo buried it in the flower bed for him so Danny wouldn't have to. I knew Milo wasn't bad, and I told him often enough. But there was something dark in him that was something that had never seen the light, and it was howling to get out. On the boy's 18th birthday, I made vanilla cake, and Danny ate every bite, blowing out the candles with Milo, both of them wishing with their eyes closed and shoulders overlapping. On the evening of their 18th birthday, they went to the bar where Tom worked that turned a blind eye to the local kids with fake IDs. And I got a call from Danny at 1 a.m., sobbing down the phone. He was calling from the hospital. Milo had been stabbed in a bar fight with a man twice his size. Tom had driven them, carrying Milo to the car where he laid with his head in Danny's lap, bleeding into the upholstery. I didn't wake Mom and Dad, another secret that I would keep from Milo. I drove over the speed limit the whole day. Danny was sat by the side of the hospital bed, still crying as Milo begged him to stop. "Hey, sis," he said, grinning wide as the sea. And I slapped him hard, threatening everything under the sun if they ever tried something like that again. And he laughed and promised that he wouldn't. I knew that he didn't want to. I knew that he would. It was a Friday afternoon in the summer after the boys graduated. Mom and Dad had watched from the back of the hall. I'd been sitting in the front row with Tom, both of us yelling and waving, embarrassing them on purpose. And I was so proud, framing both of their diplomas and hung them up in the hallway. The first thing anyone would see when they came into the house. Danny thought about everything carefully, head always in the clouds. Milo was all blood and bones, a force of nature, like a shark that could never stop swimming or he would drown. And that night Milo was out cruising in the car that they shared, no doubt full of his friends, smoking and drinking even though the sun hadn't set. Danny came into the kitchen where I was starting on dinner. And Tom was watching TV, a gory news report about a recent serial spree of murders on the other side of the country dubbed The Angel Killings. He hastily switched it off as Danny appeared in his best jeans and Milo's leather jacket. And I raised an eyebrow. The jacket was Milo's pride and joy. Showed how much he loved his brother that he'd let him borrow it. The girl working at the 7-Eleven had written her number on the slushy cup that she had given him. And her name was Rosie. He showed me, shy and proud, staring at it like it was made of straight gold. They were going to the bonfire on the dunes that night. He begged to borrow my car as Milo had theirs. If it had been Milo asking, I would have said a hard no, knowing that he would probably drive it into the ocean drunk. Or off of a cliff. But Danny wasn't a drinker. Preferred the beer that the kids would store in the coolers in the sea to keep them cold, over the hard stuff that Milo kept at the bottom of his wardrobe. I had made him promise to be careful. I made him promise to be home by 2. And I handed him the keys, watching him drive away to pick up his girl. And I woke up at 5 a.m. The house was a still and silent thing, gentle hush of the sea outside. I left Tom sleeping in bed, pulling the blankets over his head. Both boys' rooms were empty. and I checked my phone. 11 missed calls from Danny. I slipped on my boots, leaving the laces untied, too pissed off to care. I jogged down the hill to where the sand met the tarmac, sky lavender above the dunes. I walked the length of the beach, calling their names, furious. I expected to find Milo passed out drunk and Danny crying with worry. And in the half-light casting gentle on the scattered driftwood, by the base of the cliffs, I saw a mess of figures, dark blue with shadow. And as I got closer, I saw my brothers, kneeling in the shallow waters as the tide crept closer, salt blowing off the sea through the dirt blonde of their hair.
Dan, come on. You have to call them,
Milo said gently, pressing his phone into Danny's hand. Danny pushed it away, shaking his head, tears falling.
I'll call them then,
Milo sighed, raising the phone to his ear. He gripped Danny's chin in his free hand, lightly turning it this way and that, looking at the cut on his mouth, blood smearing on his chin, and a bruise on his cheek. Hello, officer? Yeah, I'd like to report a murder. 5 bodies lay between them, blood swallowed softly by the sea. Each of them had multiple stab wounds to the chest, the neck, the hands, blooming like dark flowers through the torn material of their shirts, hair wet in the swirl of water. Danny and Milo sat opposite each other, wrists locked together, and I couldn't tell who was who as the tide came in. The bodies had belonged to 3 boys that had graduated the same year as the twins, and 2 older men that I didn't recognize. They wanted Milo, wanted blood, wanted him dead. Milo had been in too deep with some bad people. They had seen Danny in his brother's jacket and thought that he was Milo, dragging him to the edge of the beach away from the bonfire, knives in their pockets, guns slipped down the back of their jeans and tucked beneath shirts. But Milo had stopped them. Anything for Danny. Milo leaned back, head on Danny's lap, no longer able to sit upright as the salt from his blood mixed with the salt of the ocean, surf breaking on his knees like unknown islands. Danny pressed a hand to the hole torn in his brother's chest, as if to check if their heartbeats were still keeping perfect time, blood spilling over between the gaps into his fingers. And Milo's eyes fluttered, like the wings of a bird, red meeting blue in the water around them. He placed a hand over Danny's as his breathing slowed. I knew my little brother wasn't bad, but the thing that lived inside of him was. And I fell to my knees, silent as dawn washed the sky clean and sirens surrounded in the distance.
Hey, Daisy,
Milo smiled, wide as the sea and sky.
It's okay. Now I can't hurt anyone.